Welcome to Morning Call, a podcast where we share our experiences around letting go of grief and learn to move with grace through mourning. We are your hosts, Alyce Christina
and Crystal Lee, two friends who connected through yoga and movement and ultimately found a deeper connection over our own parental losses.
We share how our experiences have informed us to live our lives more authentically, boldly, and in the now so that you can do the same. We believe where there is pain, there is transformation.
From the loss of a loved one to change in a career, a heartbreak, identity shift, and many other forms of loss, we walk this path together.
To discover the light within the darkness, we recognize the joy within pain and invite you to dive in with us as we share in the hope, laughter, and lightness of the mourning journey.
Join us for stories, interviews, and conversations that connect us as we explore the universal experience of loss that invokes the becoming of one's true self.
Hi, welcome to Morning Call podcast. My name is Alyce.
And I'm Crystal.
Welcome if you're joining us for the first time, or welcome back if you've been with us on our journey here. We are a podcast that discuss grief in many various different forms. And today we are going to be discussing anticipatory grief. Yeah, and that we're coming off of Mother's Day and moving into Father's Day, right? And both Crystal and I have experienced a sudden loss in one of our parents, my mother and Crystal's father. And, and we're just kind of dissecting and learning and relearning, what this form of grief looks like for us.
Yeah. And Alyce, this piggybacks off of our recent episode. If you listened, and if you didn't, we talked about milestone dates, not just anniversaries, but somebody's birthday or just, I don't know, dates that meant something to you and your person, or, it could be a divorce date or whatever. So go listen to that one if you hadn't. But we thought this kind of went hand in hand with that topic, because oftentimes with a date, there's what we're going to call, anticipatory grief. So maybe let's back up, and what does that term mean to you, Alyce?
Yeah, anticipatory grief, are just the moments leading up to those milestone dates, right? Whether it's, a birthday, the death anniversary, just an anniversary of something, a birthday. And I also, now that I'm sitting here thinking about it, I'm like, I think that there's also some kind of connection between that anticipatory, the days leading up to, but also the days following, right? That there's something to unpack there. What does anticipatory grief mean for you?
Yeah, I agree. I think in our culture, there's a lot of focus, rightfully so, on the day that something happens, right? A birthday, right? In a positive way, we focus on the day, and then many of us celebrate I just came off my birthday, right? When I was been celebrating for a few days before, a few days after, right? So I think, and for me, anticipatory grief indicates that surrounding time frame, right? My experience has been in the days leading up to either my dad's birthday or even a holiday. Christmas Christmas was Christmas before he passed, and it's still Christmas, but I feel something leading up to the days often in my body, and I'm like, oh, why do I feel something, whatever it is?
Mm-hmm.
And then to your point, even the days afterwards, it's kind of like a grief hangover, right?
Yeah.
you have a little bit of the lead up and then the hangover afterwards. So I think the discussion here is maybe I'm sure there's plenty of people listening who that resonates with, but I think there's maybe people who haven't experienced that. It's just to educate folks that, like, hey, you might also feel sad, angry, happy, I don't know, in the days leading up to and the days after the date that's significant to you, and don't be surprised by that.
And be it may take you by surprise, right? Like, because we
Yes.
don't always, um and what there is, I think, to share is that you're not alone in it. Like, it's a very natural
Yes.
experience to have. Um,
Yes.
what is the definition? I think we looked it up, Crystal, of anticipatory grief.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it is still relevant in the way we just talked about for sure, but like by definition, it refers to grief occurring before an impending loss. Um, so if someone is terminally ill, and you're grieving in advance of that person dying, or even it could be yourself, right? Like you're grieving if you are the person with terminal illness, you're grieving in advance of the loss, right? So obviously that is also a major form of anticipatory grief that clearly.
And I want to reiterate too, though, from our standpoint, like, I don't, I know I didn't have that experience with my mom. When
Right.
it was very sudden. So there was like zero time to grieve anything because it
Yeah.
happened so fast. So it was almost like in reverse that I experienced um the sensation. And I reflect back on other losses that I've experienced, whether it was, my aunts, uncles, grandparents, um, where I did have time to process. I also don't think that I had the language to really identify what anticipatory grief was or how I did it.
Yeah. Right. And I think that's why we're talking about it, because until you really experience it, there isn't good language in our culture. I mean, it's getting better. Like I just Googled it and there was something out there. But again, it was very much in the medical context of losing like someone. And I'm like, there can be anticipatory grief. Like you talked about earlier, and I don't want to downplay, I'm not trying to compare a wedding to a death, but like, we talked about kind of like there's like a lot of anticipation before a big event, and then as soon as it's over you're kind of like sad. There's this like almost like event hangover, like a grief hangover too. So um but anyway, so there's not a lot of language around feelings you might be feeling leading up to a day and after a day in our culture. So I think it's important that we are saying, like, to your point, this is normal if you're feeling this. Because for me, to your point, I remember, it's almost like unconscious. I'm on year 7 since my dad passed, but I remember those first couple years, it would be like a week before or 2 weeks before, and I'd be like, oh, I'm so tired, or like I would just have a wave of like an up and down or emotions, or I don't know. And I'm like, what is happening here? And now looking back, I'm realizing I was experiencing anticipatory grief. You know what I mean? But I didn't have the words to put around it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and leading up to, because you just had a birthday um a couple months ago. You celebrated the milestone of losing your dad. 7 years, post 7 years, right?
Right.
um and now we're leading into Father's Day. What are some things you have experienced or are experiencing right now when it comes to anticipatory grief?
It's funny. We're recording this the Wednesday before Father's Day, and Father's Day is a Sunday. So, in this moment, I feel kind of okay. Um, but based on, historical evidence, um, and it may not happen, like that's what's so interesting about grief is you never know how you're going to feel. but typically like the day before or even 2 days before. So maybe come like Friday, Saturday, for me, it's very physical. Like I'll just get tired and I'll feel kind of like grumpy and I'm like, ugh, I don't know why. And then I'm like, oh yeah, duh, Father's Day is tomorrow. And like same. I mean, that's kind of how I felt with my dad's like death anniversary this year. I was like, again, I wasn't really consciously feeling those things, but I remember just feeling like the whole month of April is kind of tough for me because there's like the last day I talked to him, like that's emblazoned in my mind. And even if I'm not conscious of the day, like my body always remembers. Um, so yeah, it's interesting. And I know like we're coming off Mother's Day, like this year was kind of different for you as well, right? Do you want to share about that?
Yeah, I think like leading up to it, I was really busy with work, and I had a couple of moments, like overwhelming moments of being like just kind of like shit, I'm gonna die too. Like, how am I gonna die? Like, am I gonna get like and almost like this fear of like what's gonna go wrong in my body, right? And
Mm.
it's like I feel like I do a pretty good job because, there's a lot of stuff coming at us in the world. Um, and I practice um, being optimistic, being an optimist about, you know, um, doing good for my body that does good for our the world around me, and for whatever reason there was like I had a moment on the couch where I was just crying, and I had to tell Hudson like I'm just completely terrified that the same
Yeah.
thing that happened to mom is going to happen to me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was just like I was
I get
kind of
that.
having like some weird stomach, like things that aren't usually normal for me happening. And then it was just like this kind of downward spiral um of worry that I felt.
Mm.
And then I actually, the day of came, the day before was beautiful. We got to be at a good friend's wedding, and it was lovely. Hudson was in the wedding. I was just a guest. And that was like just a beautiful space of connection. But I also wasn't with Amelia. So, you know, on Mother's Day, I kind of had my ups and downs of like tears. And overall, it was a beautiful day, right? And I think it's, again, I don't think I tried to pull myself out of this. It's like what was required in the moment for me to like move out of this space of worry, right? Because I think at the end of the day, it's just a fact that we're all going to die at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like it is
Yeah.
what it is, and like what what could I do? What could I offer myself to like to bring myself back into the moment, to where I was, to assess like, okay, was it something that I ate? Was it,
Yeah.
and I think that part of it was and is the emotional stress leading um up to that day, up to that moment, up to, just like, your my body. And I think our bodies are innately intelligent that when there's something to move out of your body, it will do that if we allow
Hmm.
it.
Oh, for sure. Whether you wanted to or not, you're
Right.
like, I gotta
Right.
move. I gotta do whatever.
Right. And I think, I think our society has, we're such a unfortunately like such a fear driven society where it's like, it's like a media and all kinds of things like that's like really, I don't know, maybe it's political, I don't know, but like, even like doctors are like, they've ingrained in us, all the different fads of like the easiest thing for me to think of. It's like when I had a baby, the thing that like you weren't supposed to do with your baby, right now is completely different. Well, now that
Yeah.
that thing's acceptable, but like there's something else you're not supposed to do with it, and it just, we instill this fear in in many different moments of life. That was just the easiest example that came to me. And what, my work is like, what can I do to like, to move out of that fear?
What are what are some practices, best practices, tips? I mean, I hate to say like tips and tricks, but like that you have found, because we are going into year 4 for you since losing your mom. Has anything helped you, whether it's that fear reaction or just, deep sadness or whatever it is surrounding the days, these hard days? Has anything helped you? Like,
Yeah, and I
anything
think
you
it
can
plays
share?
into like noticing, like, how do I restore myself, right? And it's like in that moment of like deep worry that I was having prior to Mother's Day, I didn't run away from the feeling, right? I didn't try to
Mhm.
suppress it. I identified the ways in which I needed to move with it. It's like, okay, let's do the checklist. Did my body feel bad enough that I needed to um, seek medical help? No. It's like kind of like, doing the things that like, um, that allow me to get grounded into my body and trust my body. Like, um you know was I moving, like intentionally moving day to day? And
Mhm.
I don't think I was, right? Like I hadn't gone to a yoga class in a while. There was a day where I was like, I'm just gonna go walk, and a lot of walking and crying my eyes out, right? And then like once that release came, I was like, okay, now I can, and now I feel like I have the energy to go take a yoga class, right? And I think I took two
Right.
yoga classes back to back, which felt really great in my body. And then, so that
Yeah.
kind of restored energy in my body and reset my brain. Um, yeah, I allowed myself to come back home, right? Instead of
Yes.
living in this like scary, ungrounded sense of myself. Um, and I think what's really
Yes.
important to say is that I didn't, I'm very intentional about not suppressing that feelings or dismissing them, right? I think that it's really important to, and that's one thing that I think we continue to talk about on the Morning Call podcast is how we move with grief, because it's not a one and done thing. It's not something that ever goes away, right? And these different waves, like anticipatory grief, sometimes it creeps in and sometimes it's like a smack in the face.
Yep.
Um,
So true.
and then, and just really it's about listening, tuning into your, at least for me, it's about listening to my body. And sometimes it means that I just need a rest, right? That I need to just curl up on the couch and give myself grace and permission to take a nap or
Yeah.
to ask for help. Like I have no capacity in my being left to like figure out what's for dinner. I need I need someone else to do that.
Yes. Yes. Speaking up, asking for help, 100, like leveraging your community 100% when you're like, because you're spending so much like emotional, mental energy, and then which makes you physically tired. They're like, I need help. I can't do one more thing.
And I think it's like it's identifying, it's like I've a lot of the light year leadership work has given me these tools. So it's like literally I have a notebook of ways to restore myself. right? And if like I'm so ungrounded or disconnected from my body because of um and a lot of the times in the moment I don't put language that is, and sometimes I do, right? Like that it's anticipatory grief. And sometimes that's simply a tool to recognize that that's what you're experiencing. Um, and
Right.
and I also in the moment sometimes can't figure out what it is I need. So by simply, it's like a gratitude journal, right? Like if you have things written down that are easily accessible, right, that gives me permission to like, oh, I have this. Here it is. Here's that, you
Right.
know,
Right.
not my little black book of past lovers. It's like my little bag book of like how to love
Here's
myself.
gratitude. I know
Yeah.
mine is a notes app, like a note in my notes app. It's just like a
Yeah.
gratitude. I'm like, let me consult this today because I'm not feeling that great. And I'm able to
Yeah.
look there. I'm like, oh, look at all these things I have to be grateful for. You mentioned like the grounding, and it's so interesting how sometimes it can be so simple, like how the physicality of obviously like a gratitude journal and or like writing or being still, like there's, but sometimes I'm like, am I eating healthy today? Did
Mm.
I rest? And like, am I resting enough? Did I sleep well last night? Um, Not that just because you sleep well, you're not going to have griefy feelings, but I'm like, am I taking care of myself around the time that I know I'm going to feel extra sad, angry, whatever it is? Like, am I eating healthy? Am I drinking water? Am I, again, sleeping well? And like, those are all to me, they're grounding practices. It's just like the basics of being a human. But I find if I get out of them, it makes me feel worse. Right.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Um, And the other practice that to me that's also really simple is I'm probably going to totally butcher this and we can look it up and put it in the show notes. But it's a practice of like when you're whether it's you're feeling depressed or you're feeling anxious or having a lot of times it's to help someone through like a panic attack, but I think it completely applies here is name it's like the five like it's like name five things you can see, four things you can hear. I think it's like three things you can touch. I'm going to get the order wrong. Two things you can smell, like one thing you can taste. So it like brings you back to the present.
Mm.
Like you have to like stop and like look, literally look, listen, touch, and
Yeah.
that has helped me so many times when I'm like, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling something? I don't know, but let me like get back to myself.
Yeah. It's the mind gems, hand over the soft spot, right? And it's bring attention to the present time. I mean, on a daily basis, I'm like, ooh, I need to be here. Right. And it's
Yes.
like doing this, simply like landing yourself back in your body and being able to identify like what's real, what's not real, what's the story, what's the fear,
Yes.
what's the fear driven story, what's like the reality I want to have. Right.
Right.
And, and that's not to say that that reality is always going to be butterfly and roses, but like, there can be even in the weight of, because it's like, yeah, I think I like, moved with this fear of like not dying, but like dying in the way in which like my mom did, which was like it was just sudden. It was just so fast. And like it wasn't pretty. I was like emotional. I was um had zero patience for anything. I was snappy. I was
Yeah.
grumpy. Can you imagine me grumpy?
I mean,
No, just
yeah, like grief is like that. It
yeah,
isn't pretty. It isn't, you can't put a bow on it, right? Like you can't be like, you're typically not always your best self. And it's okay, right?
yes,
Like, I mean,
yes,
just it
and
is what it is.
it is what it is, right? And I think that's the important thing of being like because we either want it to like, or we've taught that it's not supposed to exist, or like if we feel it, stuff it somewhere else, brush it under the
Right.
rug, hide it, hold it in, right? Don't share it with anyone. And I think like if I can get through to anyone, it's like share it with everyone, right? Show up
Yes.
in your realness, like in that vulnerability, and that's gonna give others the permission to also start to move with that grief, right? And then it does like that, the thing that we perceive as like ugly and messy and you know does in a way shift to become a way that connects us on a deeper level. It provides more compassion and grace, not just for ourselves, but for the people we encounter, right? Because we don't know what other people are moving through on a day to day basis. And if we can show
Mm,
ourselves that same compassion, then we more easily can show that to others.
yeah. I mean, we've talked about this on, I think, previous episodes, but like the concept of befriending your grief, um, or just trying to understand it because you can't. It's like a disease that goes undiagnosed. Like you can't really, if you don't even know what it is and you can't name it, well, you certainly can't deal with it, right? So like I'm not trying to compare grief to a disease that's undiagnosed. I'm just saying it's like you can't really, like, you don't know how to work with something if you can't even name it, right? So I think if we name it and we talk about it and we say out loud, like we're honest with people that we feel comfortable being honest with, it becomes easier to carry it around. You like becomes lighter, right? It's like, okay, I know what I'm dealing with. And that back to the anticipatory grief thing, like again, we're 5 days before Father's Day. It's like, okay, like I've been here before. I've kind of been able to name this in the past. Like the first year and the first few years for Father's Day, it was like weird. Like I'm like, what is this? Like, what am I feeling? Oh my God. Like it was pretty jarring. I'm not going to lie. But I think being honest with myself and like talking to you and talking to friends who I feel comfortable talking to about it, like this is how I was feeling, it has made it or made me more prepared for maybe what's to come surrounding a day like Father's Day. Like I'm kind of like, okay, like I think I know what to expect potentially. So the more we give something language, it just helps us work with it better.
I guess that's the practice of like letting go. I don't know if we've talked about this at all. And I think that's like one of the greatest lessons in particular that losing my mother has offered me, right? And it's the continuous practice of letting go of, I mean, really everything, like letting the people we love fly, right? Or letting go of that, letting go of expectations of ourselves or of situations, letting go of, yeah, like my own understanding of the way I think the world should work, right? Because it's
Mm,
like it's also
it's a
like
good
when
one.
I give myself the space to let go, and on the other side, not just like of the weight of like this mental um concept, but like physically when I let go and I'm like dancing full out, or singing at the top of my lungs, not caring what anyone thinks my voice sounds like or doesn't sound like when I let go of like I I have a greater sense of presence, of freedom, of like
Mm,
allowing the world to like flow with me. And also like when those moments of opposition or you know weight of why show up, there's more wonder in it. and it's like I'm less likely to be looking for an answer, and
Yes.
more likely to be like curious with the feeling, right? So like even when it's like if it's dark and heavy, there like I can balance a sense of ease in it all.
Yeah. You bring up such a good point because I think back to even the discussion around fear, I think one of the reasons we're so averse to talking about death in our culture is because there's often not, or there isn't an answer, right? Like we
Mm.
don't know what is beyond after death. Um, we don't know when we're going to die, which is, I mean, it's terrifying if we really are honest about it. Like, but to your point, if we let go of the need for concrete black and white answers all the time, which I know those are nice, but we live in the gray space in this world, right? Like not everything is answerable, and especially around death. Um, so I think when we practice that letting go that you said, your mom's death has taught you, same with my dad's, like we talked about this on the episode where we talked about, how it changes your perspective. Um, it's honestly, to me, it's easier to live like when I really practice it and I'm like, okay, let me just try to let go of expectations. Or like if I get irritated because someone's like not acting the way I want them to or something, I'm like, why are you expecting them to do such and such? Like they are their own people. You are your own person. Like let it like relax. Like that doesn't have their, they can live in their gray area. You can live in, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
um I think when you're like forced, not forced, but when you face a loss, especially like in a manner where it's pretty quick and you may not have time to like try to process, um you're almost like forced to like live in that gray, but it's like beautiful, like you're saying, it helps you to be like freer. But if people are just so afraid of it in our culture because they want the black and white, they want the answers. Does that make sense? Am I making any
Yeah,
sense?
absolutely. Yeah, and it's just like, I think, to circle it back around to, these experiences leading up to, these milestones, right? Like I have 4 years on July 26th of losing my mom, and like right now I'm like, wow, 4 years. Okay. Like, let's do summer. Like that's like where I am. And I'm feeling more um sadness over the loss of like the experience of the weekend I just had celebrating two of my best friends getting married, right? Like, and it was so lovely. And, and there's so much anticipation over the year of like planning and making things happen and, getting to celebrate the moment, not just with them and their families. And Amelia was the flower girl, and my dad got to come. And, the joy of sharing this experience with them. Um, and Hudson, of course, I was a bridesmaid. And, uh, and there was like a moment in this ceremony when they recognized, the people that weren't there in their family too. And like, I was
Oh,
just bawling, standing up there, had my dad give me a hanky so I could hold my bouquet with it. I'm like, oh my God.
oh,
And it's just like, oh, where were we? I guess it was Amelia's fifth grade graduation last week too, before we went, to the wedding. It was the wedding was in Nashville, and Amelia graduated fifth grade, and we got to her moving up ceremony a little early, so we walked. It was downtown in Charlotte. People know it as uptown. I call it downtown. Um,
I do too. Like, it's downtown,
It's
okay?
always
Not
downtown.
uptown.
Anyway,
Yeah.
uh, so we walked to go get some coffee, and we were walking back through First Ward Park, and uh, Amelia just like kind of put her arm around me and was like, "I feel like Mimi's watching us." And I was like, "Oh
Mm.
yeah." It's like,
Oh,
what made you, what makes you feel that?" She was like, "I saw a
I love
cardinal
that.
over there watching us walk through the park," and I
Oh,
was just like,
I love that. I love
you know,
that.
and similarly, like being at this wedding and standing there and like seeing my dad and Amelia and Hudson and, you know, this unity of people that have come together to support, you know, our friends' love, whether given or chosen family. You know, there was a weight of sadness to not be able to
Yeah,
share that with my mom.
yeah,
and and then all I had to do was like look up at the sky, you know, or like hear the
yeah,
birds chirping in the morning, or you know, the frogs at night, and it just like, yes, there was a moment of like wait and gratitude to like just recognize that, like, oh, when I see with these eyes of wonder that I have, just like Amelia, like she's still here. She's still living with
yeah,
us. She's living in
absolutely.
the full expression of my child jumping up unannounced to give a speech to the bride and groom in front of the entire reception.
Oh my God, I
It was
cannot wait to
like,
hear this. Oh
um,
my
she was
God. I hope you have it
eloquent.
on
She was
video.
beautiful. She spoke from her heart, you know. And it's, you know, it's like, it's things like that that like keep me living, right? Because it's like we only do have one life. And yes, this, you know, the buildup. And now it's like off of that. Like last week was such a whirlwind from her fifth grade graduation to going to the wedding and doing all these things. And then coming home, and work is just like constant go, go, go. And now today I'm like, I'm tired. My body is tired. And I'm like, oh, but we were so present over the weekend together. Everyone was, that it was just like, I'm like, I want that every day, not just for
I know.
myself, but for everyone,
I
right?
know.
Like
I know.
we deserve this as humans, to be in this state of connection and love, like no matter if it's a moment of celebration or a moment of trial.
Yeah, and you spoke to, that's what I was going to ask, is like an event like the wedding where the whole family's there. So you spoke to that, like how, there were moments of like thinking about your mom. And I imagine with Amelia's like moving up ceremony, I mean, same thing, right? Like, of course, you want her there, like you wish she was there. Um, and so, yeah, it's almost like it's a celebratory, you were always living on the in between, like the line, like it's a celebratory weekend. Like to your point, everybody should have this connection and community with like two of these like amazing back to back events. And it's like you're teetering on the line of like, oh, but it would be so nice if my mom was here, right? So I feel like when you've experienced loss, you're like always on this like ledge or something. You know what I mean? Like in a good and a bad way. And so my point, the reason that it's like there's like that's like an emotional roller coaster kind of. So then when it's over, you're like, oh God, like you're so
Yeah, it's the post grief of like, you know, and it doesn't, yeah, it is. I was going to say, when you were just talking, one of the hardest things to navigate that day was not, you know, watching my dear friend and her mom, you know,
yeah.
interact. And it's like there was a moment where I think she was getting her dress on and we weren't in the room with them, which, you know, and I think I like went to go get something, and then I was like, that I like just got a little glimpse, and I was just like, the tears just welled up. I don't know, in my eyes, and I was just like,
Well done.
also I had just had my makeup done, so I was like, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry.
Yeah.
Right.
So
And
as a
then
microphone.
it's like, and then I see like my baby girl, like, getting her makeup done, and like just there's just, to not only like know, like just I guess to know both sides of it, like the daughter role as much as the mother role, and like all of
Mhm.
these parallels of life. And I'm grateful that I did have that experience with my mom at my wedding, gosh, like 17 years ago, right? Um, and it was the most beautiful day, and I'm so grateful for that memory. And also like looking ahead of like how I want to celebrate my love that I have with Hudson now is there's also kind of like this bittersweetness that like she's
Mm.
not physically here to
Right.
celebrate with her.
Right. That's that like line I'm talking about. We just teeter on the bittersweet line,
Right,
right?
but
Like it's like,
that's what makes us human.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right,
I
to
mean, that's
be
what
able
like we feel both things at the same time,
to
right?
move
Like you're
it
like
like,
this is
yeah.
there's a sweetness and there's a bitterness at the same time, and like that is what makes us human,
Well,
right?
and that's our light, your leadership concept of balance is dynamic, right? It's not stagnant. It's like you don't get the
Mhm.
balance, and it takes constant like navigating to keep yourself balanced, right? And sometimes that balance spins on a sideways axis, like it's
Talk to me more like about, you mentioned the 4 years coming up. We're in June when we're recording now, and that's going to be in late July. But there were a lot of like dates leading up to, well, not a lot because it was sudden for you, but I mean, there's like, the day your mom went in the hospital, whatever, right? So how do you feel now? Like you mentioned, like ready for summer, but also, like, how do you feel in this moment? How do you feel about July coming? I mean, like, kind of what's on your mind?
I think it's just moving with the flow of summer right now. Um, in this moment, I feel good. I feel it's like I know that's coming. My 40th birthday is coming up. I
Yes.
got myself a. I was gonna wait for someone to get it for me, but then I was like, screw it. It's a same bracelet. My sister has this, but I
Oh,
bought
that's
this one for
beautiful. I love
myself.
that. I love
Um,
it. For
Yeah, it was
you.
just
I
something
don't.
that like I really wanted for myself, and yes, these are my mom's earrings, and my mom's wedding band. So it's like it's always like I always have these things on me, but the bracelet for whatever reason just meant something to me. And I know it wasn't hers. My sister has that. And I'm so glad that she has that. And I was like, I want one too.
Yeah, but it
Um,
like represents her, right? So it's
yeah,
basically the same thing. It represents
yeah.
her. I love
It was
that.
really cute.
You
My
look
dad
at it.
noticed it and was like, wait, where'd you get that? And I was like, I bought it for myself.
I
He was
love
like, I
that.
was looking at them. I
You.
was like, well, sorry, I beat you to the punch.
Yeah.
And
I
I
mean, but
think, yeah,
back to that bittersweetness. Sometimes it's like, you know what? We're not guaranteed tomorrow. I'm going to buy myself a damn bracelet.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So it's just like, there's a lot of like summer celebration and memories to make, which I'm excited about. Um, and I think you said it's just about, checking in, right? It's checking in for you this week as Father's Day approaches, and like, assessing what's needed in the moment, like what's required for me to, keep my center, right? To stay
Yep.
grounded, to stay connected. Sometimes it looks like, the ugly cry on the bathroom floor. Other times it's asking for someone to make dinner, or a hug, or hey, I need to work from home today. Or, for me, a lot of times it's like, I need to say no. I need to not have this on my plate right now. And if the
Yes.
moment comes around and I feel okay, I'll be there. Otherwise, I need to take a step back.
Yeah. That's been one of my biggest takeaways too, is like if I know that historically it's been a hard time for me, like say the days leading up to Father's Day or days leading up to my dad's birthday, I try to look at the calendar in advance and just like not clear it completely because I mean I have to work, but like the best that I can. And letting friends know like, hey, this day is sometimes hard for me. I might turn down social requests or like I just may not be as present until the day of. I just don't know how I'm going to feel. So then the day of comes and I might want to be this most social person you ever met. I have no idea. But I just try not to like overcommit in advance.
Absolutely. I had one more thought. It's like, I was like, ooh, I was like, maybe this year for the death anniversary, I'll go get a tattoo.
Ooh, I love
I was
it. You
like,
should.
and
Oh my
that's
God.
like, yeah, I don't know. And I think that's like, it's part of the things of like, sometimes we're impulsive as humans. And I think that's like, I think we largely focus on trying to control like outcomes and control lives, our lives, other people's lives, right? And sometimes it's just fun to be impulsive and
Yeah.
spontaneous, more so spontaneous, right? Like and maybe I do make that like tattoo date on the day that on her death anniversary, and I go get a tattoo, whether it's in honor of her or like a silly tattoo. I don't know. I don't know. She's probably rolling her eyes at me, but
The day before, if you want to cancel, you cancel. Okay, but what would you
right.
get? We need to know
I
before
don't
we
know.
end.
I
Hello?
have no idea. I don't know. But I think that's true. It's like we're also not taught like I think when in conversation of our last episode about the milestones and like do we celebrate them? Do we not? It's like it's okay to do things that are fun, right?
Yeah,
Like they don't have to be weighted in sorrow,
yeah,
right? Like and
for
I think
sure.
that's the difference. That's the difference between grief and mourning, right? Like when
Yeah,
you are in a space of mourning, it feels lighter. It
yeah,
feels like a celebration. It feels like an honor to be honoring their legacy in
yeah.
any way, shape, or form that you choose.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this on the Milestones episode, but like we listened to my dad's albums and a lot of his music was like classic rock and it was upbeat. It's like the Eagles, like Take It Easy and like weird Beatles songs or like, I mean, he wasn't like the biggest Beatles fan, but I do have some of his records, but like it's Crosby, Stills and Nash. I don't know. It's like, it's just like fun. It's sometimes like fun, listen like driving music, right? Um, and it's become, I mean, I think in the beginning maybe it was sadder because I was like, oh, my dad can't listen to this anymore. And now I'm like, it's like joyful. So I agree. I totally agree.
Thank you for joining the Morning Call podcast. Our intention is that you found a nugget of hope, inspiration, connection, or all of the above.
If you seek to dive deeper with the Morning Call community, email us, subscribe to our page, leave a review, and fill out our survey.
We want to hear your stories and widen the conversation to support and empower our grief experiences as we collectively become our true selves.
Find us and subscribe on all streaming platforms, YouTube, and at Morning Call Podcast on Instagram. You can also email us at morningcallpodcast@gmail.com.
This podcast was edited by Alexis Carrasquillo from Familia Creative Media.